What's up, you guys? My name is Aubrey, this is my channel, and today we're going to be doing an update on Getaround. You see, about 6 months ago, I joined the Getaround platform with one single car, and very recently I decided to delist that car from the Getaround platform. So in this video, I'm going to be giving you guys my thoughts on Getaround, why I decided to leave Getaround, whether or not I think it is better or worse than Turo, and whether or not I recommend using it. So let's get started. Now, before we dive in, I would like to note that I have a really bad cold right now, so I apologize in advance for the congestion, for the fact that I think I sound a bit sick, though I don't know how much of it will translate over video. I've had a gnarly cold since the beginning of November, and I've been feeling good, then I feel bad, then I feel good again, then I feel bad. It's been on and off for the last month, but fingers crossed that the most recent doses of antibiotics that I received will do its job and I'll finally start to feel better, but I apologize in advance for the fact that I am very obviously not feeling super great in this video. Now, with that out of the way, let's dig into the topics of this video. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Getaround, Getaround is a platform very similar to Turo, but in execution, it's actually quite a bit different. Now, while Turo's tagline is own the adventure, and they want to really market themselves as a place where you can rent cool cars for your next adventure, meaning your next vacation, your next road trip, your next outing, Getaround is very different in the way in which they market. Getaround markets their cars to people that want to use their cars for commercial use. That's kind of their bread and butter. Not only is the way in which they market and they've positioned themselves different, but the types of cars that they accept are very different as well. On Turo, you have to have a car that is 12 years or newer, you have to have a vehicle that has 130,000 miles or less, and the car cannot have a salvage title. On Getaround, you also have to have a clean title vehicle, but the car can have 200,000 miles or less, and it can be a 2007 or newer. The only kind of different caveat that Getaround does have is that the car has to have automatic locks and windows because it has to be able to support the Getaround tracker, which is a tracking device that you're required to install into your car that allows for you to remotely unlock and lock your car with your phone. This is a required piece of equipment by Getaround. It costs $20 per month, and you have to get it professionally installed by a partner shop that has partnered with the Getaround platform. Now, let me first talk about some of the things that I like about Getaround, and then we'll talk about some of the things that I dislike, and then lastly we'll talk about why I ultimately decided to leave the platform. Now, one of the things that I do like about Getaround is the fact that they do allow for more vehicles to be rented out because of the fact that they allow older vehicles and higher mileage vehicles. This is something that is handy, especially if you're somebody who's wanting to rent out low-end economy cars, which is something that I've done on Turo for 4 years now. Getaround is also really passive, which is something that I did like. With Getaround, you don't have to check in the car every 24 hours like you do with Turo. You just have to check in the car once a week. As long as you have photo evidence proving the fact that you've been checking your cars on a weekly basis, you will be covered in the case of any damage, any cleaning fees, any negligence on the part of your renter. In fact, I put this to the test because over the summer, my car was in a pretty severe accident on Getaround, and they covered everything 100%. So that was really nice. And the fact that I don't have to worry about checking in the cars every 24 hours, that was a pretty big bonus, especially because of the fact that if you're somebody who travels, if you're not at your vehicles all the time, the ability to only check in your cars once per week is a really big selling point. From a host perspective, Getaround is a pretty hands-off business model. All you have to do is get the vehicle, list the vehicle, and then add the tracker to the car, which is the 3 required steps that you need to do. And then from then on out, everything else is pretty hands-off. You don't have to verify any ID information like you do with Turo. You don't really communicate with your guests. Everything is pretty passive, which, depending on how you want to run your business, could be viewed as either a good thing or a bad thing. I know that the passivity of Getaround as a whole was something that was considered to be a pretty big selling point whenever I was contacted by Getaround to list my vehicle on their platform. But if I'm being honest, after being on the Getaround platform for 6 months, this was something that I viewed as a negative, not really a positive. You see, if you're somebody who is really wanting a very passive income stream, something that you don't have to put a whole lot of thought into and you don't really need to learn the ins and outs of, I think that Getaround could be a really cool option to go down because of the fact that it's so hands-off. But if you're somebody that's had a Turo fleet in the past, and if you're somebody that really knows the peer-to-peer car sharing space, then I don't really see this hands-off approach as a positive. In fact, I see the lack of control as a negative. And so with that, I guess this is a good time to segue into some of the things that I did not like about the Getaround platform. First and foremost is that lack of control. With Getaround, you don't really have any control over your vehicle and your vehicle listing, which again, I think sometimes could be viewed as a positive, but for me personally, it was viewed as a negative thing. To give you guys an example, I had a 2009 Scion XD that was listed on Getaround. This was a clean car. It was 4 doors. It was really nice on the inside. It was a bit worn on the outside, but it was a solid commuter car. car. If this car was listed on Turo, I would have priced this car at between $30 and $35, and it would have been rented out quite a lot. On Getaround though, this car was rented out for between $50 and $60, sometimes even $70 per day. In my opinion, I think that this is just simply way too high, and as a result, there were not enough renters who were able to afford to rent this vehicle. Because of these high prices, my Getaround vehicle sat the vast majority of the time, while my Turo vehicles that were very similar but priced significantly lower were rented out significantly more. And then that brings me to my second point, which is the Getaround tracker that I mentioned earlier. Getaround requires you to install a tracker on your vehicle, and this tracker allows for the guest to have access to your car. Basically, how it works is whenever a renter rents your vehicle, they can access your car through the app. And so whenever they go to your pickup location, rather than accessing a lockbox like my fleet does with Turo, they instead go into the Getaround app and they can unlock or lock the car through the Getaround app. Now, on the surface, I think that this feature is super cool. In fact, I was super interested in learning about this whenever I first joined Getaround. But after a while, you get tired of this device. Number one is the fact that this device costs $20 per month, which isn't a big deal, but if your car already isn't generating that much revenue per month, paying $20 for a device that is required for you to have is something that I just didn't feel super great about. Number two is the fact that because my car wasn't getting rented out that much on Getaround, my car was spending a lot of time sitting, and this Getaround device was draining the battery on my car while it was sitting. So this passive business model was becoming less and less passive because of the fact that either myself or my fiance HP would have to go drive down to the lot and drive the vehicle every couple of days to ensure that the battery wouldn't die because of this Getaround device that was installed on the car. Now, I will admit that that is a bit of a nitpicky thing to complain about, but it did become a pain to have to deal with the fact that this was killing our battery every couple of days. Another big complaint with Getaround is the transparency around how much you're getting paid, as well as the timeline in which you get paid. With Turo, you get paid on a weekly basis, sometimes multiple times per week, depending on how many cars you have. And with Turo, you have the ability to view your dashboard, which shows you how much money you have coming in, what transactions you have coming in, which ones you haven't had come in, how much earnings you have coming up. It really is very, very transparent, and that's something I really appreciate with Turo. But with Getaround, this transparency simply isn't there. You only get paid once per month, and there isn't really any sort of good reporting tool that you can use to see a breakdown of how much you're earning. Not only that, but you don't get to see how much you're about to be making. So for example, we are in the month of December. Well, we just ended the month of November a few days ago. If I wanted to see how much money I made in November, I can't see that until about a couple of weeks into December. It's basically on like a 3-week delay because everything needs to be calculated. Now, I'm not exactly sure why this is the case, if like numbers are actually being calculated or if it's just a delay on Getaround's end. I'm not exactly sure why this is, but this is something that from a host perspective is a pretty big pain in the butt. For me, for example, I run my P&Ls every month. So for the month of November, I will run that P&L within the first week of December, but I'm never able to calculate my Getaround earnings in that P&L because of the fact that the earnings aren't even finalized until the end of December. This is again something that I think may be a bit nitpicky, but from a business owner and from a host perspective, I think it's a pretty big deal, and I think that this is something that Getaround should really work through. Now, ultimately, whenever it comes to Getaround, I think that they provide a really valuable need. People need cars to rent out in order for them to take part in the gig economy. That's something that really does fulfill a valuable need in society, and it's something that is strictly prohibited on Turo, so that's an added bonus for Getaround. The problem though is that the framework with Getaround simply isn't there, especially if you're somebody that is used to Turo. I think that if you're somebody who just joins Getaround and you have no background knowledge of Turo and how Turo works, I think that you would probably have a much more successful time with Getaround because you don't have any point of comparison. But if you're somebody who has been on Turo for a long time and you're used to how Turo works, I think that joining Getaround may have a bit of a learning curve because of the fact that it is so different. Now, as for the reason why I left Getaround, it really does come down to everything I listed in this video. I just think that I was leaving money on the table by keeping this car on the Getaround platform, and I think I would have much more revenue potential by listing it on Turo. The only downside is this car is not eligible to be rented on Turo because of the fact it has too high of mileage. So the game plan here is to sell the car and then use the funds to buy a different car that is eligible to rent on the Turo platform. Now, one other thing that I would like to note is the fact that Getaround is a pretty new platform to the DFW area, which is where I'm located. And I do ultimately think that that is a really root cause as to why I had so many issues on the Getaround platform. There are other markets throughout the entire United States that are much more solidified with Getaround, and I would guess, and I'm not entirely sure if this is true or not, but I would guess that these these markets would be much more successful. But ultimately, if you guys have used Getaround and you've had a different experience, I would love to hear your thoughts. I'd love to hear what you guys have experienced, because this is just my opinion, and I certainly think that it may be exclusive to the DFW area. It may be exclusive to the type of car I chose to list. I'm definitely not a Getaround expert, so I would love to hear your thoughts as well. Like always, you guys, if you have any questions, comments, if you have anything to add, make sure to leave a comment down below. And while you guys were at it, make sure to hit the like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit the notification bell. And I will see you guys in the next video.